I don't have a funny intro today.
Oh, I don't either.
Should we just do nothing for this intro?
You just look.
This book sucked!
No,
it
it didn't.
It's pretty good.
Hello, and welcome to Your Favorite Book Podcast. I am Mallory.
And I'm Tanner.
We're siblings.
We like reading books.
This week we read Hell Followed With Us by Andrew Joseph White. This book is a little different than our usual stuff. This is one of our sister's favorite books, and we read it for the Trans Rights Readathon that's happening this week. Woohoo! Trans Rights!
Woo!
We're going to put some links in the description so you guys can find some more information about how to participate. There's a whole bunch of ways you can participate by reading, reviewing, and uplifting trans authors and books about trans characters or people who are gender fluid or gender nonconforming. And yeah, we'll put some links down in the description. You can follow along on Storygraph, Goodreads, TikTok. There's a website. So yeah.
You'll find some good stuff and you help support a good cause.
Yeah, there's a lot of different readers who are donating money for each book they read and participating in that way too. So
Yeah. I had never heard of this book before.
yeah, when we did our top 5 book review a couple weeks ago, our sister commented on it, and this was her number 1 top book.
Okay.
So I wanted to look into it,
Yeah.
which is fun, and I'm so glad I read it. It's not a book I would usually read.
That surprises me because it feels like a YA dystopian.
Yeah, I guess it is a book I would usually read. I just hadn't heard of it before.
Yeah, it didn't come up on my radar either. This isn't the type of book that I personally like to read, but ever since finishing the Hunger Games series, I have been wanting to read a different type of post-apocalyptic book.
Yeah.
And this, for me, in some ways, did scratch that particular itch.
Yeah, so this book follows the main character, who's named Benji, and it's in a world where there's been a major apocalypse, and this involves a virus that has killed a lot of people and caused them to be mutated into amorphous monsters, basically. Yeah. And there's also a lot of religion, and there's a
cult.
Yeah, a cult.
Called the Angels, right?
Yeah. And they are the ones who've released this. It's called the Flood into the people, and it's like, oh, non-believers will be killed.
Yes, and the unworthy will be killed by the flood.
Yeah.
So that's their justification for destroying the world, is that they're purifying it for the second coming.
Yeah. It's really interesting.
Yeah, it was super interesting to me too. This is really a revenge story, post-apocalyptic revenge story. I always love a good revenge story.
I do too.
One that I read recently was Shadow of the Gods by John Gwynne, which is kind of similar, like very simple plot where like someone you love is taken away from you, and the whole goal of the story is to get back that person or to get revenge for that person.
Yeah.
And the first chapter or prologue of this book I found to be very gripping. Begins with Benji's father is killed by a death squad. And Benji is trying to run away from them. And he gets captured, and it's written very poetically, I would say.
Yeah, the writing is very lyrical.
Yeah.
I like it.
It's interspersed with quotes from scripture. You can tell this person, well, I don't know, but they either did their research or they were raised in that very evangelical environment.
Yeah, I feel like the author probably has religious trauma.
Yeah.
I think that's a pretty safe assumption to
Yes,
make.
I think so too. And I found that relatable personally. So I was personally invested in Benji's internal conflict.
Yeah.
In that regard. Obviously, we're both cis white people, but we're allies. And so reading a book like this was a really good opportunity for me personally to get to know what it's like to be a trans person.
Yeah, I really loved that aspect. I think sometimes you'll get queer representation, but it's like, oh, the funny gay side character, and that's kind of all they get.
Or that's the only thing about their character.
Yeah, exactly. So it was so exciting to me to read about someone's experience just as a regular person who is trans.
That's the type of representation that I like.
Yeah.
I mean, I was born as the default character. I was straight white male. So I get all the representation ever since the beginning of Straight White Males.
Yes, yes.
But, oh God, what was I saying?
We were talking about representation and it being genuine.
But there are some characters that are poorly written where it's like their only purpose is to be the token queer
gay character.
or gay character. And there's nothing else to their personality. But for Benji and all of the other characters in this book, they felt like real people. And being a member of a minority was not like the only thing about them that made them special.
Yeah, they were all complex. They're all trying to survive in this crazy, crazy, hectic world.
Yeah.
And they're still like, oh yeah, I'm still a complicated individual. Here's something about me.
Yeah.
You know?
And then it's like, oh, Salvador.
Yeah.
He uses neo pronouns. It's like, that's just Salvador.
Yeah, yeah.
And same with Nick. He's autistic and gay, but Nick is also stoic and brave and conflicted, and he has his own motivations.
Yeah.
That's just Nick.
Yeah.
And I thought the book did a really good job of obviously representing each of those groups.
Yeah.
I mean, I know my word doesn't have a lot of weight because of who I am, but that's how I felt. I did enjoy this cast of characters.
Yeah, I did too. And also, I'm grateful I listened to the audiobook because I always am unsure on how to use neo-pronouns.
Yes.
So I really enjoyed
Me too.
reading about someone who uses they, them pronouns and listening
I've never
to
heard
someone.
before.
Yeah, I've heard of it before, but I haven't ever...
Didn't know how it was pronounced.
I didn't know how it was pronounced, and I've never met someone personally who uses those pronouns.
Same.
So I was like, oh, I'm so glad I get to learn more while doing something I love. Like, I really loved learning about their character and learning about the conflicts that they go through. And so I was like, oh, okay, it sounds so natural because it is natural.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yes. And people who get hung up on that, it's very silly.
But I don't have time for people like that.
No.
Yeah.
I don't either. Pronouns are just pronouns. Everyone has them.
Yeah, I think it's funny when people are like, I don't use pronouns. I'm like, yes, you do.
Yeah. For me, coming off the back of Hunger Games, I obviously saw a lot of parallels between the two. One of my complaints from Mockingjay in particular, which we did just last week, was that all of the characters felt almost exactly the same.
Yeah.
In terms of personality and in the way that they were described. They were all straight white men, except for Katniss, who's a straight white woman.
Yeah.
Just like, I want some more color to my world. And this obviously had a ton of color and diversity, more than any book that I've ever read. And I really enjoyed that.
I did too.
Yeah.
There's a setting in the book called the ALC, the ALC.
Yeah.
And it's this old Center for LGBTQ plus youth. That's what it was before the apocalypse. And then the apocalypse happened, and all of the youth that were staying in that center stayed there, made it a safe haven.
Yeah.
And so we get this excellent cast of characters who, like, we get this wonderful found family. I love a found family trope. It's one of my favorites, and it's fun to see the complex relationships between all of the characters. And I think Andrew Joseph White really shines with their character work. So
yeah, I think that was probably the most compelling part of the story to me, were the character relationships, the character dynamics. Speaking of the heartwarming found family nature of this aspect of this book, it is a very nice counterbalance to the body horror.
Oh, yes. Yes. In the first... The
first
beginning
chapter
of the book starts with Benji being like, wow, I can taste my dad's blood in my mouth because he just got shot in the face in front of me.
Brains are splattered all over my body.
Yes.
It's really... There were times where I was like, wow, this is a little too much for me.
Really?
Yeah. And we just...
It is.
And we've been reading Gideon the Ninth, right?
And Red Rising.
And Red Rising.
Like, we've been reading some pretty gruesome stuff.
I know, they're super violent, but for some reason, their descriptions of some of the body horror stuff in this book really creep me out.
Yeah,
I say that as a compliment, as a positive thing.
Yes, I think part of the difference is, like, for Gideon the Ninth, it was like, a skeletal construct, you know, it's a little bit more abstract, versus the descriptions in this is like, oh, there were 3 human faces meshed on one with rows of serrated teeth on the seams in between the skin. Like, it was very like,
I know. It was very visual for me. I could picture all of their environments, the monsters, especially the chapel was really creepy.
Yeah.
But I guess I'm speaking more to like when Benji first wakes up in the middle of the night and they feel a sharp tooth growing out of their gums.
Yeah.
And they're like, I have to pull this out because if people see, then they're going to know that I'm a monster. So they try to pull it out with a pair of pliers in the middle of the night. The description of it is so, you know, stomach churning.
Yeah, so Benji, the main character, has been purposefully infected with the flood.
Yeah.
To become something called a seraph, which, you know, is like a great angelic leader. And Benji's created as a seraph so that he can control the other people who have been infected with the flood.
Yeah.
That's another big plot point, and Benji is trying to hide that from the people he's with. Nick knows that Benji is a seraph, but everybody else doesn't, and he's trying to hide that. So when he starts showing clear signs of turning into that monster, in his dream state haze, he tries to rip that out of himself, and it's like, I thought that was really interesting as someone who has OCD, and I do have intrusive thoughts like that before, where it's like...
Did that bother you?
It actually didn't. Also, trigger warning for, like, self-harm, I guess, I would say. But this whole book is pretty gruesome and body horror-esque, so just...
I created a new term for it, actually.
Oh, what?
And I don't know if this is original.
Oh, I'm so excited.
Okay, here it comes. I call it flesh punk. Because the chapel is
love
like
that.
covered in disgusting limbs and tissues and bones.
Yes.
It's so gory and gross, but it reminded me of like Bloodborne and Remnant, which were video games while I was reading this. I'm like, I should download them and play them again. But I don't have time for that.
I love that. Flesh punk is such a great way to say that.
Yeah, I thought it was a fun new term we could use for stories like this. Yeah. And I think Gideon I think it definitely is.
I think it
goes into that
does.
category.
I think it does.
Even though it's more like bones and stuff. But
I think it still works.
Ianthe, you know, this isn't a book about Gideon.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, the world building and the descriptions to me felt very unique and cool and creepy.
I wonder how many nightmares Andrew Joseph White had before he decided to write this book. Do you know what I mean? He's like...
But even, like, there are some dream sequences in this book, and I know we're not really talking about what the story is yet, but we'll get into it. Like, some of the visions that Benji has are so descriptive.
Yeah.
Like, they kind of made a chill run down my spine.
Yeah.
Like, I haven't felt that from a book in a while. Like, their ability to establish tone is probably one of their strong suits for me. Like, their one dream about the tree with the corpse hanging from it.
Yes.
And there's a river of blood, and then there's this angel walking behind the tree. It was so creepy. It felt like I was reading about someone's actual nightmare that they had.
Yeah, it was very fun to me.
Yeah.
I enjoyed that. And I enjoyed, like, Andrew Joseph White does a really great job at really embracing the poetic nature of biblical complications and real life complications, and like comparing Benji's journey through, I'm raised in a cult, these people are just killing people, with how he feels about religion. Did that make any sense at all? Somewhat.
To some religious scholars, that would make sense.
It didn't make sense to me, so...
No, I think the ideology of the cult is it feels real. It's like, what if we just took this evangelical, basic Christian ideology of, like, Revelations, there's a lot of quotes from Revelations in this book, and made it real? Like, what if they had a scientist who created this disease, and they justified its use for the second coming of Christ? And then they also do a very good job of, like, separating Benji's understanding of what the world is through the vernacular of the cult, where it's like, this isn't like some disgusting monster, this body horror beast combined with like 6 bodies. That's a grace.
Yeah,
and you're going to become
that was so
seraph.
fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when Benji first meets Nick, who's basically the leader of the ALC, he says, do not call them a grace. Don't call yourself a seraph. Like, don't use those words.
Because that's going to show that you're with the angels rather than against them.
And Benji was raised in this cult, the angel cult.
Yeah.
And so that's all that they know.
Yeah.
That type of world building felt really realistic to me. It kind of reminded me of Midnight Mass.
Yes.
Which is probably the best thing ever created.
Oh, it's such
in mankind.
Oh, it's so good. It's a TV series.
Yeah. It has kind of a similar world building aspect where it's like, I want to write about a group of people that see a monster and justify it as a part of their religion.
Yes.
And that was so cool, that reveal of like what the monster was in Midnight
Spoilers
Mass.
for Midnight Mass, just in case.
We won't give it away.
Okay, good.
Was so fantastic.
Yes.
I got hints of that in this book as well.
Yeah, for sure. I really enjoy watching people take religion and push it to the absolute extremes.
And give it some crazy fantastical elements.
Yeah. It's a fantastic commentary on religion
Yeah,
and on the
is.
nature of cults, to be like, this actually might not be that far off from how someone really does view the church. You know, like if your personal opinion, I don't know.
Yes.
It's interesting.
You could use your beliefs to justify anything.
Yes.
Is kind of what they're saying.
Yes.
Like, the Bible is so interpretive. And people could be led to believe just about anything as long as it fits within what they want emotionally.
Yeah, or what they expect to.
Yes.
Yeah.
So all those aspects of the book I truly loved.
I did too. I also enjoyed like the form of the book in that each chapter started with a little snippet of a Bible verse or
me too.
like a sermon from Sister Whiteside or Woodside? Woodside, or like, you know, things that religious leaders in this world said. And I liked being like, oh, that makes sense to this part of the chapter. Or like, I like stuff like that in books. I think it's
So do I. I think that's stuff that most people skip over, but I like getting these little contextual bits.
Yeah, I do too.
Those parts of the book actually made me feel like it was a video game too.
Really?
I could just imagine myself like
loading into the next level.
Well, not even that. I could like imagine myself exploring these post-apocalyptic ruins with Benji and Nick and the rest of the crew from the Watch, and like going into a building and picking up a piece of paper. And like most players would be like, whatever. Yeah, but you'd read the paper and it'd give you some more details into like the overall world building and the characters.
Yeah.
I thought that was cool.
I do too. I like that. They do that in The Last of Us really, really well.
Yeah, they do. We should probably get into what this book is actually about. What happens in it.
Yes.
So Benji, like we said, is a trans boy who's raised in this cult. And they kind of throw you right into the middle of this person's story.
Yeah.
In medias res.
Yes.
I would say this book kind of checks all the boxes on like how to tell a good story.
Yeah.
It was like the exact right scope. It was a good smallish to middle-sized book. I don't know if we'll get any sequels, but it's a good contained story.
Yeah.
All the things that are set up at the beginning are paid off, and we start in medias res. Like Benji has just escaped from the cult with his father, and we don't know why he keeps saying things like, I'm going to become the Seraph. We don't know what that means.
Yeah, we get some very raw immediacy of like Benji vomiting guts out, literally.
Yes.
And you're like, oh,
this
okay.
is horrifying.
Okay. And you're like, why? But I don't know, I like that.
Yeah, they do a great job of establishing a sense of mystery, right? Where it's like Benji can communicate with the Graces.
Yeah, with the evil monsters that people are terrified of.
Yes, and we don't know what that ability is, but Benji keeps himself from doing it because he keeps repeating this refrain of "I'll be good, I'll be good."
It's like the last thing he promised his father before his father died.
Yeah.
It's very sad.
Yes.
Which we don't even see happen, which is interesting.
Yeah.
But I kind of like it.
Me too. It doesn't really matter that much. It's just to establish his motivation, I think.
Yeah.
of like, this story is about getting revenge for his father.
Well, and his father is one of the only people who really are like, when Benji comes out as trans, his mother immediately is like, no.
Mm-hmm.
God has not given you more than you can handle, you know.
Yeah.
But
this is just your burden.
Exactly, but his father is like, you are a man, don't let anyone take that away from you.
Yeah.
And his father is the one who's like, we got to get you out of here. This is not it yet. So
yes.
it's sad to see Benji having his only comfort taken away so brutally by the leaders.
Mm-hmm. By the angels.
Yeah, by the angels.
I think anyone who has experienced loss can obviously empathize with that and relate to it.
Mm-hmm.
For someone who's a member of a marginalized community, this is like exactly who I think this book is for.
Yeah.
Obviously.
Yeah.
Like, this is about that struggle of finding your family.
Mm-hmm.
Like, Benji's father is ripped away from him. And then that's like, most people were invested in Benji because we can relate to that, losing someone that you love.
Yeah.
And wanting revenge for that.
Mm-hmm.
But the story really is about Benji finding people who love him for who he is.
Yeah.
No matter what.
Mm-hmm.
I also found it very funny, and this is kind of spoilers for this whole book, that at the end, Benji comes out to his community, his gay community, queer community, as a monster. Isn't that funny?
It's very interesting.
I feel like there's some deeper meaning in this book that I obviously didn't pick up on, that I would like some more time. Like, obviously the flood infecting people and Benji being trans and becoming a monster.
Yeah.
There's some kind of metaphor there.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because Benji doesn't have a choice in becoming a monster.
Yeah.
And oftentimes we see religious figures say, oh, you're choosing to be gay, you're choosing to do this. And
or you can be gay, but you can't act on it.
Yeah, exactly. And for Benji to avoid acting on being a monster the whole time, and then when Benji's finally like, okay, this maybe is just a part of who I am, and I'm going to learn to grow into it.
Yeah.
And then for Benji to be like, before I move on and embrace that part of myself, I need to tell the people I love about it first. And Benji is like, okay, I'll go be your monster. I'll kill all the angels.
Yeah.
But
cards on the table.
Before I do that, I need to confess to everybody in this room that I am what I am.
Yeah.
And Benji does, and everybody's like,
we accept you.
Cool.
Yeah. Because, and this is something that I also loved about this story, is that the queer community did not accept Benji. They accepted Benji for being trans right away. Right? But they didn't accept him as a part of their community, as a person, because he came from the angels?
Yeah, I think yeah.
Or, like, they wouldn't dead name him. Nobody would. But it's not like everyone in the queer community wanted to become friends with him right away.
Yes.
You know? Like, even Nick, he's a little distant at first.
Yeah, and he's still seen as an outsider.
Yeah.
And they don't trust that about him because all of these teenagers have been through really, really bad stuff.
Yes.
So.
And I think this kind of speaks to, like, the type of representation in this book where it's like, being queer is a normal part of that person. Well, it's also normal for a queer person to be a bad person.
Yeah.
Right? Like, Cormac, he's not necessarily a bad person, but he also comes from rich parents.
Yeah.
And he's kind of an asshole.
Yeah.
Like, I think most people, when they hear about, like, woke diversity in media or whatever, they'd watch a movie from Hollywood and it'd be like, all the gay people are all good. And they all love Benji right away and accept him right away.
Yeah.
That's not the case in this book.
They're real people.
They're real people.
Yeah.
And it takes a while for Benji to integrate into that community, to find the people that he connects with on a personal level.
Yeah. Yeah.
I guess we should talk about how Benji actually finds Nick and the people in the ALC.
Yes.
It really won't take that long to explain. But, like,
Benji is running away from the angels and keeps on running and almost makes it out, essentially, past the city limits or whatever. And right as he's about to get there, he gets caught, and the angels are like, hey, we're going to take you back in. You're our seraph. You're our saving grace. We're so grateful you came back to us. And on the way back to New Nazareth. That's the city that they're from. And on the way back, all of a sudden, people in the death squad is the group of angels that's escorting Benji back. And they're like, aren't we by that place where something bad happened 2 weeks ago? And the guy in charge is like, nope, couldn't be it. And they're like, look at this map. It is it. Mm-hmm. And then someone gets shot in the face. And then more people get shot in the face.
Yeah.
Basically, these teenagers from the Alk, they are killing angels and chopping off their ears to redeem for goods and supplies with another group of people called
the Vanguard.
And so they've been tracking these angels and are taking them out to get supplies. Mm-hmm. And Benji's caught in the crossfire, literally. So Benji's trying to get away from them, trying to hide, and Nick is like the leader, and he finds him, and there's like Benji is clothed in the angelic robes, and he rips them off. He's like, I'm not with them. And Nick is like,
I trust you.
Okay, but you're on thin ice. Because, I mean, it's weird that the angels would be escorting a random teenager back to New Nazareth.
Yeah.
They would just
kill
them. They wouldn't want to keep them alive. And that's another big thing in this plot, is that Benji is much more valuable alive than dead, which is, good.
To both the angels and to the people at the Alk.
Yes.
So throughout the story, Benji's kind of like walking this fine line between being within the Alk and not letting them know who he is. Mm-hmm. Because if the Alk, they established the Alk as being really poor and deficient in terms of resources.
Yeah.
And they have to keep trading with the Vanguard to get supplies. Mm-hmm. And that kind of leads to one of my main complaints of the story. Mm-hmm. I really don't have a lot of complaints about the story. I honestly did enjoy it.
Mm-hmm. Me too.
But the plot is primarily motivated by we need food, we need water, we need Band-Aids.
Yeah.
And the revenge plot, and you and I think we feel the same way, didn't really kick in until like maybe the 75% mark.
Yes.
But we can get into that more later.
Yeah.
But Benji, if the people at the Alk knew that Benji was the Seraph, then they would turn him into the Vanguard and get tons of supplies.
Yeah.
So that's why Benji's trying to keep his identity hidden from them, even though Nick knows exactly who he is and is protecting him.
Yes. I really enjoyed Nick's character a lot.
Yeah, I did too.
He's very complex, and
he has a nice little arc.
Yeah, he does. And we do get a couple of chapters from Nick's perspective, and we get one from a character we haven't mentioned yet. He's named Theo, which is Benji's fiance / ex-fiance.
Mm-hmm.
But
yeah, fiance is fair.
Yeah.
This is something that the story does really well, is they throw you right into the middle of Benji's story. Mm-hmm. So it feels like, even though the plot isn't super exciting for most of the book, for like maybe 3/4 of the book, you're still learning about where Benji came from.
Yeah.
What their worldview is. They do a very good job of establishing what their worldview is. Mm-hmm. And the complex things that happened to them before the story began.
Yeah.
So
it's still very compelling because you get a lot of like, you hear Benji's internal thoughts that sound normal to Benji, but when you're just starting the story, you're like, where does that lead? What does that mean? Where does that come from? So you want to find those solutions more than there is a plot, I guess.
Yes, no, I totally agree. And it's actually kind of similar to Harold the Ninth in that way, where it's like, my primary reason for wanting to read this book is not based on let's go on an adventure.
Yes.
Which is something that I personally love about a book.
Most books should have a good plot.
Yes, I agree. But you don't necessarily need one to write a compelling story.
Yeah.
Like Harold the Ninth and this book are both good examples of that.
Yeah, I wouldn't think of that. But both of these are very successful, and they both are page turners for me.
They are.
Even though it wasn't day one, go defeat the dragon. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Yes.
It's interesting.
Exactly.
It's just a different way to tell a story that I wouldn't think of.
Yes. And my own little pet theory is that there are the reason why that is because there are lots of different types of progress that you can have in a book. And I think the most obvious one is plot.
Yeah.
Right? What are we doing? How are we working closer towards this goal? And the book is about making steps towards reaching that goal.
Yes.
So if this book is about Benji, he's going to get revenge for his father. We really don't know, like, how specifically is Benji going to do that?
Yeah.
Benji's plan is to stick by Nick and do what Nick tells him to do, because Nick and the people at the ALC, obviously they're a community, they're a family. That's part of, like, internally, that's something Benji wants, is to find a family that accepts him for who he is. So that's part of the reason why he stays with them. But the other reason is that Nick is killing angels.
Yeah.
And Benji's like, that sounds good to me.
Yeah, and Benji's like, I could help.
Sign me up.
I can help in ways that no one else can help.
Yeah, and he tells Nick what his powers are. Well, Nick actually sees what Benji is capable of when they first meet.
Yeah.
When he controls a grace by telling it to relax and stand still so Nick can shoot it.
Yeah.
And so Nick knows that Benji has that ability and he can use it to help them kill more angels. And they can use those bounties to
Get more supplies. Yeah.
Unfortunately, that is the primary sense of progress in the story.
Yeah.
It's pretty obvious and it feels really slow because we're not working towards the revenge plot that was established in the first chapter.
Yes.
It'd be nice for me if it was like, okay, who does Benji want to get revenge on specifically? Reverend, sister, whoever that invented the flood.
Yeah.
That injected Benji with the disease that's going to turn him into a seraph. Right?
Yeah.
And then how specifically are we working towards that goal? Like there's 3 encampments. We have to work through encampments A, B, and C before we get to the final boss.
Yeah, or Benji has to practice on graces and become more efficient at speaking to them. Or, you know, slowly Benji starts out with just being able to control the young graces and eventually graduates to the older, more powerful ones, or something like that, versus just him being all powerful from the beginning and just being like, okay, I guess I'll go on another mission.
And I'm so glad you brought that up because I think you're exactly right. That would be really satisfying if we saw Benji progress at his ability to communicate with the seraphs.
Yeah,
control the graces.
Yes, we know we both love a training montage.
I know.
I want more training montages.
I do too. We'll find a good book with a training montage eventually.
Yes.
Actually, I know of one.
I know of a couple, I think.
Okay, we'll read them in the future. I know that we will. That is that type of progress where a character learns a skill, especially in a book like this, is a world building sense of progress.
Yeah.
So there's world building for tone, which is like the flesh punk stuff, all the dark and romantic and dramatic things about the world. And they do a good job of establishing that through their writing style.
Yeah.
And then there's the world building type of progress, which is like the character learns a skill that is specific to this world that doesn't exist in the real world. Right? Well, it doesn't have to necessarily not exist in the real world.
Yeah.
You could read Hunger Games and Katniss as like getting better at using a bow. But that's a world building sense of progress in my own mind.
Yeah. No, I agree.
We kind of get that, I would argue, for Benji. But his limit is not physical. His limit is emotional.
Yeah.
So in the first scene, Benji says, I'll be good. I won't control the graces.
Yeah.
That's his limit.
Yeah.
So over time, he learns how to accept himself for who he is, being a seraph and having this ability to control the graces.
Yeah.
So there is kind of a sense of progress in that regard.
Yeah, and I also enjoy that we learn with Benji about the graces, because from Nick's perspective, graces are just monstrous inhuman beings.
They don't feel emotions.
Yes, but to Benji can connect with the person that once was that grace.
I like that too.
I really enjoyed that, and Benji is like, this monster is scared. That's why it's doing this. It's not just because it's power hungry and wants to murder you. It's afraid. And Benji can connect to that and be like, you're safe, you're fine, relax, which was interesting. And I think that's the same kind of growth.
Yeah, you're totally right. So that world building sense of progress is linked with Benji's internal sense of progress.
Yeah.
Right, which is accepting himself for who he is as a seraph, and the abilities that come along with that.
Yeah.
It's kind of similar to my favorite anime, my guilty pleasure, My Hero Academia, where it's like, it's all about magic systems. So many different magic systems. Every character has their own rules. Someone like Deku, the main character, every time he uses his power, bam, he breaks his arm. That's his limit.
Yeah.
There's a character called Todoroki, who's ostensibly an invincible hero. He's got half cool, half hot. He could use his fire powers, but he might overheat.
So he just uses,
So he uses
cool,
his
powers.
cool powers.
Yeah.
So he could just use both at the same time and be a limitless source
Perfect
of energy.
balance.
So what's his limit? It's an emotional limit. He doesn't want to use his fire side because his father abused him, right? And it's kind of similar here. And I love that in a magic system.
I do too. I love when magic has a price, and I love when that price is non-conventional.
Yeah.
You know. Yeah. It's fun.
So I think that is definitely the type of progress for Benji's magic system that's in this book, which I enjoyed. It's not quite as evident that they're like learning how to use their powers better.
Yeah.
Because whenever they use it, it's like all powerful.
Yeah.
So it kind of feels
like... And it
like...
also comes easy to him too.
Yeah. So in the scenes where Benji has to use his powers to overcome an obstacle, it kind of feels like it happens quickly.
Yes. Yeah.
That he didn't have to work too hard for it. But that's being kind of nitpicky, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
Because there is a cost, right? It's the emotional cost.
Yeah. Well, and I also think Benji, when Benji uses his powers, especially like in front of Nick, Benji can tell that the people around him are uncomfortable.
Yes.
And Benji's like feels guilty about that and doesn't want to be seen like the Graces or like the monster, even though he is, you know, which is fun and complex.
Yeah. All those things matter when it comes to making a scene like the chapel scene where the massacre takes place feel more rewarding.
Yeah.
Benji also, this isn't mentioned explicitly and I was kind of confused by it, but I felt like every time Benji used his powers, he became more like a monster.
I think so.
So there is like a ticking clock element where it's like in 3 weeks, no matter what, there's nothing Benji can do about it, he's going to become a seraph. And there are some disgusting scenes where like his flesh is falling off. He's just peeling it off of his face. It's gross.
It's pretty gnarly.
But that's also a cost to using the magic system as well.
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree. I think I also didn't quite explicitly put that together.
Yeah.
But it's definitely implied at least.
Yeah. That was kind of my own headcanon as well. Part of what I enjoyed about the story.
I agree. I like that. Like, the more he used his power, the more monstrous he becomes.
Yeah. It's a nice ticking clock element. Right. And that helps us feel like the story is moving. Yeah. Like we're making progress towards something.
Even
like,
if
you
it's
better
just
hurry and get
progress.
revenge.
Yeah.
Or else you're going to turn into a monster.
Yeah. It's good.
Yeah. The other type of progress that this story has that does a really good job with is the relationships.
Yes, okay, I was going to just bring that up. I was going to say romantic progress, but I think relationship progress is better because it's not just romantic.
Yes. Although the primary relationship in this story is romantic, there's a nice love triangle.
Yeah.
Between Benji and Nick, who we've mentioned before, and Benji and Theo, who is Benji's fiance from The Angels.
Which is fun and complex.
Yeah, I really like this.
I was excited to explore the relationship between Benji and Theo.
Me too.
And I was a little scaredy and a little nervous. But Theo's like, okay.
I love you.
I was nervous about watching the potential of a trans person being engaged and then coming out as trans and how that would affect a relationship. And so it was interesting to me to read about how Benji's partner Theo uses the correct pronouns, uses the correct name, and is like, I like you.
And loves them for who they are. Even when Benji is getting sicker and becoming more of a seraph.
That too.
And Theo is still like, you're still you. So it's maybe not until, is it like halfway when they meet Theo, or is it kind of earlier?
I think it's about halfway, if not 40% maybe.
Yes. When we actually meet Theo, Benji has been living with the ALC and integrating into that community and hunting angels. And they're not getting enough supplies. They're going to die. So they're like, all right, let's scout out a new location
We can get a big payload.
Yes, there's a bunch of angel initiates at this church where I assume all of the angels' initiation ceremonies take place.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's...
I think so.
There's some things about that are kind of unclear.
Yeah.
It doesn't really matter that much, I think. Jeez, excuse me.
You're good.
But yeah, they Nick and Benji both plan to use Benji's power to control the Graces to basically massacre everyone in this chapel.
Yeah, and I think the Graces are kind of used as bodyguards.
Yeah.
For some of the upper angels, I think.
Yeah.
Like, quite a few of them have, like, Grace companions, essentially.
Yes. And this is one thing that I was kind of confused about their world building. Is like, can anyone who's been infected by the flood, can they control a Grace? Or is it only Benji?
Yeah, I don't think that's clear.
Because the Graces will like follow around and do as some members of the Death Squad order them to. But I don't know if it's because they have the same ability to communicate with them that Benji
just at
does.
A lower level or something.
Yeah, because if they
that's
can do
not
the
quite
same
clear.
thing, then it doesn't make Benji's powers feel very special.
Yeah.
So it's not really explained. We just kind of assume like the Graces, they just obey the orders of the angels and they know who to attack.
Yeah.
Unless Benji's there, then Benji can talk with them. So that kind of stuff is kind of not explained very well.
I agree. It wasn't clear to me either.
Or
at least
it was
from what I
explained
took
well.
out.
Yeah.
What I took from it.
Yeah. I think that's kind of neither here nor there.
Yeah. Anyway.
Benji and the rest of the ALC, they plan on massacring all these people at the chapel. They go there, they kill some people, Benji uses his powers.
Yeah, and it's also important that a lot of the initiates are children.
Yes, they're all young children.
Which is a cause for contention among members of the Watch or the
Of course, because they're killing kids.
Yeah, some of them are like, we're killing kids now, this is a little bit too far. And other people are like, they're angels, they're monsters, they're just as bad as the abominations or whatever.
Yeah.
But when
I liked having that morally gray kind of decision making with this group.
Which is actually morally gray. There's a big conversation on Book Talk right now about what is morally gray and what is just...
Which is like faux morally gray.
It's just evil people who are old, but they're dating an 18-year-old, so it's okay. That's not morally gray to me. Anyway, that's not really important. This is morally gray because it's like, yes, they are part of that cult. They will be raised to kill us, but they're also children.
Yeah.
It's
the
complex.
Do the ends justify the means dilemma.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway, the massacre goes off without a hitch, basically. Benji uses his powers, he has that crazy vision, and then he wakes up to find that Theo is there. And they do a good job of explaining, like, their backstory without, like, having too much expository dialogue.
Yeah, I agree.
I thought that scene when they first met up was handled really well.
I really liked it. I was very weary about Theo as a character.
Wary?
Weary. Weary. That's funny. Wary. Wary?
We should move past this. Wary.
Okay, I was wary about Theo as a character just because I was like, Benji's my friend.
Yeah.
You're from his past and you're part of the evil cult that wants to use him as a weapon to kill a whole bunch of innocent people.
Yes.
But you get a lot of insight into Theo's character from Benji's perspective, which Benji, as a narrator, admits that he's unreliable when it comes to Theo, which I enjoyed.
He's still in love with him.
Yeah, and it's complex, and Benji is like, oh, I don't know. Oh, now I really don't know what to do.
Yeah, and Theo's obviously well, it's not that obvious. I think it is handled pretty well because I didn't I felt like their relationship was sweet because Benji obviously genuinely does have feelings for Theo. And Theo is hard to trust. Yeah. Because he's been brainwashed by this cult.
Yeah, and the last time Benji and Theo were together, Theo grabbed his wrist and yelled at him and like...
Strangled him.
And Benji's like, has a little bit of PTSD there when he first sees him. He's like...
A lot of bit of PTSD.
Yeah. Benji has a lot of trauma, everybody. Big surprise.
They handle that well, too.
Yeah.
Like, Benji keeps wanting to apologize to Theo for what he did to him.
Mm-hmm.
Which was so great.
I also really loved...
I mean, it was painful, but it was great.
Yeah, it was. I loved the complex relationship between Benji saying... And I hope I say this appropriately. I think I will, because the author, I think, says it really nicely, but... Benji's experience of being raised as a woman who was told to be quiet, apologize for your husband's sins, if he leaves you, it's your fault, and has been brainwashed into being this very meek, demure woman. Yeah. And Benji now being like, I can be as loud and as violent as I want because
I've never stood up for myself before.
Yeah. I really loved that complex what is it called? The rest of your life in
backstory?
The past. Yes. Gosh. I liked that backstory. It was very, I loved it.
Well, it's a nice character arc too. Mm-hmm. Like there's it's associated with his primary conflict, right?
Yeah.
Which is obviously learning how to accept himself for being who he is, which he's a man.
Yeah.
Benji immediately trusting Theo because he was his betrothed, and he was brainwashed into believing you have to always, agree with the man, no matter what.
Yeah,
that's very realistic in all Christian, evangelical Christian, most religions teach that.
Mm-hmm. It's fascinating.
Yes, and they handle that really well with Benji's character, where it's like, no, he would want to trust Theo if he said, I'm sorry, I love you.
Yeah.
We should work together again. But Benji still at the same time stands up for himself. Mm-hmm. He's a great character.
Yeah. I love Benji.
Yeah, so do I. And I did feel like as Benji kept on falling for Theo again, because after Benji leaves the Angels for the ALC, he kind of starts to develop a crush for Nick. Mm-hmm. And he keeps telling himself, I'm betrothed. I can't be in love. I can't even like someone else. But he's obviously conflicted with leaving his faith and having a faith crisis and all of that complex stuff mixed in. So he doesn't know how to feel about Theo after leaving, where it's like, is Theo a bad person? I still love him. I'm conflicted on this.
Yep, but he's still tied with the religion, but he was also kicked out of his death squad.
Yeah. I don't know how to feel. Will Theo leave the religion for me? Does he love me that much for who I am? Or does he really love his religion? So when Benji meets Theo again, and Theo tells him, I love you for who you are, I'll leave the
And he apologizes too.
And he apologizes. It's like, okay, maybe we're taking some steps in the right direction.
Yeah.
Like, this is a good love triangle.
Yeah.
I truly felt torn between not trusting Theo entirely and wanting those two to work things out.
I did too.
Because I did feel like they had a sweet relationship.
And I feel like Theo was a good person.
Yeah, that's how he presented himself, for sure.
Yes, as good as you can be in a world where you're killing innocents. Like, it's not really a, not
in
really
the name
a good
of
person.
God.
But you want to believe that he's genuine.
That his emotions are true.
And that his heart's in the right place, I guess.
Yes. Pretty big spoilers for this, obviously, again. We find out that Theo's actually lying to Benji.
He's a double agent, I guess.
Yes. We don't, yes.
He's still working for the Angels to get Benji back.
Yes.
He's pretending.
So he might really love Benji, but he loves the idea of Benji vaulting him towards this higher position within the church.
Yes, he likes to see the power that Benji has, and he wants to be tied to that power.
Yeah.
Even if it means stripping away everything that Benji is.
Yeah.
Dang.
Yes, it's painful.
It's hard. It's so he handles it so well. Like I really enjoy it.
Yeah. It was very well done. It's kind of similar to, like, I think love triangles are difficult, but you can learn a lot from this one, and you can learn a lot from the love triangle in Hunger Games. I'm comparing it a lot to the Hunger Games because I just finished it. That's just what we just
read, and they're both post-apocalyptic.
Yeah, and they have love triangles in them. So, in this book, both Nick and Theo, not only are they like, oh, they're handsome, they represent two different things for Benji.
Yes.
Ideologically.
Yeah.
And whichever one Benji goes with, that should be like how we learn the theme of the book.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Where it's like if Benji ultimately decided to go with Theo, then it would be like, that's so sad. You should learn from your lesson.
Uh-huh.
Right? You don't have to stick with familiarity and sacrifice who you are to keep the people that you love loving you.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, and the real people who love you will love you no matter what.
Yes, they won't
And they
ask
will
you to
love you.
sacrifice being who you truly are.
Yeah, they'll love you for your
your love.
authentic self more than
Yes.
anything else.
And that's what Nick represents on the opposite side, right?
Yeah.
So it's really great when you have someone like Theo, who Benji does genuinely love, conflicted and torn between those two.
Yeah.
In the Hunger Games, it's a similar thing between Peeta and Gale. Where it's like Gale should have represented forgiveness to me, and I think he does. And we have our disagreements about
Yes.
that.
Yes.
We don't have to get into that. And Gale represents vengeance.
Oh, you said Gale the first time. You meant
I did?
Peeta represents forgiveness.
Oh, sorry.
That's
meant
why
the
I
other
was
way
so
around.
confused. Peeta represents forgiveness.
Yes.
Gale represents vengeance. Okay, we're good. We're good. At first I was like, what Hunger Games did you read?
Yeah.
Anyway.
No, I'm just an idiot.
Nah.
Okay, I'm just a fool.
Hey, you didn't call me an idiot when I said weary.
That's true. I said we should get past this. Yeah, so that's obviously not all that it takes to write a good love triangle.
But it's a good structure
Yeah, it
for
is.
a good one.
Yeah. And I think most of the tension and most of what compelled me to read this book was that relationship.
Yeah.
Or those relationships.
I agree. I think the relationships were the biggest propeller for the story and made me more compelled to read it. Especially because we didn't really get a plot until the end. So.
The plot is based around things that feel like
Yeah.
adjacent to the revenge story.
Yeah.
Which is what I was expecting.
Me too. Maybe it's just about what I was expecting.
Yeah. It could have... I don't even think it's really a pace thing, although it might have been. Because the pace I felt like was good all
I
throughout.
do too. I
felt like there was always
feel
something
slow.
at stake. There was always something the character was working towards, even though it didn't feel directly related to getting revenge.
Yeah, and I think the author does a great job at... Sometimes you read a book where it's like, here's a little bubble, done. Here's a new bubble, done. Here's a new bubble, done. And his bubbles are overlaid.
Yeah, they are.
So it's like you're weaving through it and working on the next problem before you completely solve the last one.
Yes.
Which is good.
And I guess to use the bubble analogy, what we felt like was missing was the big overarching bubble.
Yeah.
In terms of plot.
Yeah.
Because when Benji meets Theo, he's trying to juggle, keeping that secret.
Yes.
He's like, my boyfriend from the Angels, or my fiance from the Angels, I've
I'm
been meeting with him in
supplies.
secret. I've been stealing supplies. And like keeping hidden from the ALC that even Benji's a member of the Angels.
Yeah.
That was good tension.
Yeah.
So when Benji's like sneaking out at night, I was like, oh, there's something at stake. They're going to find out that you're keeping
and
this
it's like he's
lie.
spinning too many plates. You as the reader is like, oh, something's gonna drop.
Yeah, exactly.
Just fun.
That was well done. I guess to get into the final act of this book, eventually, after meeting with Theo a few too many times, Benji returns to the ALC to find that it's caught on fire.
Yeah.
And we find out that Theo betrayed Benji, told the Angels where he and the other people at the ALC were located, I'm assuming.
Yes. Yeah, that's what I took from it, at least.
Yeah.
And Theo was like, Benji, stay with me tonight. Just stay with me for a little longer. Just stay with me. And Benji was like, this is weird. I just have to pee. And then he's like...
And then he ran away. Theo let him go.
Yeah, yeah.
And Theo's plan this whole time was to capture Benji. And I'm assuming Theo was like, don't take him by force. I'll convince him that we're in love again, manipulate him.
Get him back.
And then bring him back.
Peacefully,
Yeah.
I guess.
Yes.
With the least casualties except for all the children we're going to burn.
Yeah. Whoopsies.
Yep.
And that's where we felt like the revenge plot was finally kicking in. Theo returns to the ALC, and that's when he's like, that's it. I'm finally going to get revenge.
Yeah, because he's finally started to love these people and really care about them. And now all of their supplies are gone and they're they have nothing.
They're screwed.
Their home is gone. They gotta live in a different random building.
Mm-hmm.
And they talk to the Vanguard to be like, hey, will you help us out? And they're like, you can either bring us 20 angels
Mm-hmm.
or 3 weeks. That's when we'll meet with you next. And they're like,
we can't survive that long.
we don't have enough. Like, we're gonna die.
And there's an important moment there when Nick is the one who's negotiating with the Vanguard. And we mentioned that there were a couple of chapters told from Nick's POV.
Mm-hmm.
And we learned that Nick has been keeping it in his back pocket to turn over Benji to the Vanguard.
Like, use Benji as long as possible, and then once he can't be used anymore, they'll turn him over.
Yeah. Or if they're desperate.
Yeah.
He's kind of like
that's
this, like, an emergency option.
Uh-huh.
And Nick could have said to the Vanguard,
well, we have something.
we've got something more valuable than 20 angels. We've got this
Seraph.
person. We've got the Seraph. Mm-hmm. And there's only one.
Yeah, and I think they've tried, like, I don't remember how many times, but it's like
12 or something.
Yeah, I think
I don't remember.
I think it's 12, and it's failed all 12 times, and it's finally successful for Benji.
Yes, what you're saying is the angels have tried to
sorry.
make 12 Seraphs before. And every experiment has failed until Benji. This one, for some reason, is successful. Mm-hmm. Because they've been trying to transform a person into a monster, but it happens too quickly.
Yeah.
So for Benji, their transformation has been slow
enough.
Their body has been adapting to it so that they could remain koshin, I guess, when they finally turn into a monster.
Yeah.
This is when the story really does kick into high gear.
Yeah.
Nick doesn't turn Benji over to the Vanguard, and that finally kind of closes the arc between the love triangle when Benji's like, all right, screw Thea.
Yeah.
I'm going with Nick, or I choose Nick.
Yeah. There's a great,
it's a nice arc.
Yeah, there's a really great conversation between Nick and Benji where Benji just straight up is like, I want to kiss you. And Nick is like, Nick is autistic, and he's
I don't like being kissed.
He's like, I'm not interested in that activity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's how he says it.
Yeah, he's like, I've never done that before, and I don't think I want to. And Benji's like, that's okay.
What I'm trying to say is, I like you.
Yeah, and that's really touching and cute and sweet, and I really liked Nick as a character, and I'm an autistic person, so it was interesting to read how someone else would write autism, and the author is autistic as well.
Oh, okay.
So it's interesting because it's like, oh, autism truly is a spectrum because, you know, I don't behave the way Nick behaves, but I still see that kind of part of him. But it's really cute because Benji's like, well, we're probably going to die anyway, so how about if we don't die, we could talk about liking each other. Mm-hmm. And Nick is like,
I agree to this proposal.
Sure. I love it. It was so fun.
Yeah. The way those characters are written, they feel like different characters.
Yeah.
Which was a breath of fresh air for me.
Yeah.
Because I just finished reading Mockingjay and I was like, these all sound the same.
Yeah, it's fun.
Yeah, it's really well done. The final act of this book is so much fun.
Yeah, it's very different than the first whole bunch. Benji is like, okay, here's the plan. I'm gonna hand myself in.
Yeah.
They're going to finish the Seraph process, and then while I'm inside, I'm gonna turn all the graces against everybody, kill all the angels, and the Watch will come in and help finish off everybody, take Benji back home, and then they'll be the new rulers of New Nazareth with all the supplies and all. They're like, we don't need the Vanguard anymore. We'll have all the supplies they have.
Yeah.
That's the idea.
Yes. And this is like kind of textbook plot stuff, right? Where it's like, here's the obstacle.
Yes.
We got to kill the Reverend Mother. Yeah. We've got to kill... This entire complex is just swarmed with graces and angels.
And it's like step A, step B, step C, and it has to happen in that order.
But then things don't go accordingly. Instead of Benji turning into a Seraph, they have a wedding ceremony between him and Theo. They put him in a dress. His mother dead names him constantly.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to read.
You just want to strangle them all.
I know. And they do a good job of translating Benji's frustration and anger in those moments.
Yeah.
Things don't go according to plan. They have to adapt and they overcome the obstacle in the end.
I also...
without getting into too much detail.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to give away too much.
Yeah.
Because it's a lot of fun how the final act happens.
Yeah, how it all lays out, how it all unravels is really interesting. I really liked the book. I really did.
I did too. I think for someone who can relate to Benji on a more personal and intimate level, I can see how they would find this as like their favorite book.
Yeah.
But for someone like me, who's a cis person, I really did enjoy it. I found that I could empathize with the things that Benji went through. And like we said before, as an ally, it's a good way to get to understand how a trans person feels. And I also just enjoyed it for being a good post-apocalyptic revenge story.
Yeah, I did too. I really liked the body horror and the complex relationships that were set out, and I really enjoyed being able to expand my own personal worldview.
Yeah.
Because I wouldn't get that. I personally wouldn't get that in my life. But by reading, you can understand that and kind of see how people feel about different things that you wouldn't personally experience. And I love that about reading. It's so important.
Yeah.
It's so important.
Yeah. And that's why people ban books.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, we don't want you to empathize with this group that we're weaponizing for political reasons.
Yep.
That's disgusting. So these books are important to read.
Yeah.
All books that have a different point of view from you are really important to read. Because if you're a person who doesn't like trans or gay people or any other group, then you can read a book like this and feel like, wait a second, what are these emotions? I feel like empathy towards someone I can't relate with. What?
And then you're like, oh my gosh, maybe I was just being an idiot the whole time.
Yeah.
That's the hope.
Yes, I think I think stories like these are important to help us change. I love stories about redemption and change.
I do too.
Obviously, this isn't a story about that, really. This is more a story about like found family, accepting yourself for who you are.
A little bit of revenge.
Yeah, standing up for yourself.
Yeah. Being proud of who you are and the change that you've gone through as a human.
Yes, and not like sacrificing who you are for someone else's love. Like Theo's love, his mother's love, that's conditional. And you need to learn how to separate yourself from those relationships.
Yeah.
Even if you're not a trans person, even if you're not a queer person, like there are lots of people in your life that you might find who treat you differently. They don't accept you for who you are for whatever reason.
Yeah.
So it's a relatable story no matter who you are.
It is. It's fantastic. Yeah. I really liked it.
Is this one of your favorite books?
Oh, we almost said it at the same time.
I beat you to the punch.
No, it's not one of my favorite books, but I really enjoyed it. Yeah. Is it one of your favorite books?
No, but I also really enjoyed it.
Yeah, that's good.
I think a favorite book we've decided is a pretty rare category for us.
Yeah.
Most of the books that we read, if I were to put on a scale from 1 to 5, I would say fall in the middle.
Yeah.
Obviously. And this is one of those books, and that's not a bad thing.
No.
It's totally enjoyable.
Yeah, it was great. I recommend it. I'd totally recommend it to people.
I mean, we talked about it for an hour.
Yeah.
So we obviously enjoyed it. Thank you for watching.
Yeah.
If you liked it, please leave a like. Leave a comment. How did you feel about this book?
Yeah. We'll check out the description for more links to where you can find more books by trans authors so we can read them this week, leave reviews on them.
Yeah. Let us know if there's a book by a trans author or about queer characters that you want us to read and review. We'd love to do that. Goodbye.
Bye.